Hi, I'm Grant Bartley. Today I'm going to examine why morality is not fully explicable in evolutionary terms. The basic reason morality cannot be simply given an evolutionary explanation is that the demands of natural selection and the demands of morality are incompatible. First, let me make it clear that I'm not denying that the capacity for human sympathy and a desire for cooperation might have evolved in the sort of way evolutionary psychologists suppose it did. I'm saying that even if we do assume that our capacity for sympathy and cooperation did evolve, morality is nevertheless not completely explicable in evolutionary terms. Therefore, there is something about morality that makes it explicable only in other terms. Now, the argument for explaining morality in evolutionary terms is perhaps best made by applying the logic of game theory to the idea of natural selection. Game theory tells us that in the long term, cooperation between individuals is more effective or on the whole more advantageous for all parties than competition between them. If we apply this idea to the principle of the survival of the fittest, we can see that in social animals such as our proto-human ancestors would have been, and as we still are, there will be selective pressures to develop not only cooperative behavior, but also a mindset which promotes that behavior as fundamental. It's also fairly intuitive that there's strength in numbers, and game theory would agree with intuition here. For instance, under normal circumstances, even the strongest individual will not defeat even a handful of competitors who are individually comparatively weak. So for an economy of scale reason too, social animals would be expected to evolve brain functions that promote social cooperation. And the advantage of altruism doesn't stop at cooperation. Self-sacrifice for the overall benefit of the group can also be an effective long-term strategy for the group. Now consider this fact in light of the argument of Richard Dawkins and others that natural selection works on the group rather than on the individual organism level. Self-sacrifice can make selective sense in related groups, such as for a swarm of bees, a troop of apes, or a tribe of humans. Therefore, the argument goes, we can explain why morality evolved by saying that a state of mind which holds both cooperation and intelligent self-sacrifice as basic would be selectively advantageous, and thence we get morality. So my first point against explaining morality through this sort of argument is that morality is not equivalent to any sort of altruism that could have evolved in this manner. Altruism can be defined in the context of evolutionary theory as acting for the benefit of the group or of another individual in the group at one's own expense. Sounds pretty much like morality, right? Yes, it sounds like it, but this altruism is not morality. Altruism can only ever be justified in evolutionary terms for closely genetically related groups, with the expected self-sacrifice decreasing the more distant the relationship becomes. By contrast, morality must apply universally and not only to your group. This is because evolution-derived altruism is based on the selfish gene rationale, whereas, to use Immanuel Kant's argument, morality is based on the imperative upon all self-aware beings to recognize the intrinsic dignity of all self-aware beings, and that has nothing to do with their genetic relationship to you. Certainly there's going to be a large overlap, just because evolutionary altruism is like applying morality among your tribe. Yet morality itself cannot just be applied to your tribe, but must be applicable to all people. The difference is demonstrated when tribal and moral interests conflict. If you see a person that you're not closely related to drowning, selfish gene theory must tell you not to risk your life to save them. Whereas morality would say, yes, even though they're not from your tribe, try to save them. Similarly, when your tribe is acting immorally against another tribe, then morality says that you must go against your tribe, whereas evolutionary theory would say, do what most benefits the tribe. Thus, morality would have mandated moral Germans to oppose the Nazi Party. The way morality goes beyond tribal altruism is exemplified in Jesus' commands to love your enemy and be good to those who hate you. These commands don't make natural selection sense, but they do make moral sense, since someone being in conflict with you doesn't mean they no longer have intrinsic dignity. This brings us to the most significant reason why morality is not entirely explicable in evolutionary terms. The evolutionary process cannot justify morality because the evolutionary process is completely amoral. Evolution-based moral theory says that our ethical take on the world is derived from the natural selection process. Yet natural selection doesn't care about right or wrong. Rather, its basic principle is, what works, works, and what doesn't work, doesn't work. You can't get the grounds of morality from that. On the contrary, evolutionary theory doesn't even allow for moral absolutes. If cooperation, or more generally, morality, is working out to your advantage genetically, then good, natural selection is all for it. But if it isn't, then morality must be relinquished for the sake of survival. So in fact, whenever morality doesn't work to your survival advantage, natural selection principles would demand you abandon morality in favor of your advantage. So instead of promoting morality, natural selection means that anything goes as long as it aids survival, whether this is moral behavior such as cooperation, or immoral behavior such as murder, bullying, theft, exploitation, or sexual duplicity. And so, just as we predict from evolutionary theory, we see a lot of immorality in nature, just as immorality has also evolved to be part of the human psyche. It makes sense for the good of society that individuals act for the good of society, and so would have evolved to want to act this way. However, these everyday situations are not the test cases of the difference between evolved genetic altruism and morality. The test cases are when there's no genetic advantage involved, and moreover, potential disadvantage, such as saving the life of a stranger from another race at the possible cost of your own. Relatedly, even if natural selection happens to promote genetic altruism, it's not as if nature cares whether you do or don't so act. Indeed, why should nature care whether an act is moral or immoral? Nature can't care about anything, because nature doesn't have a mind to care with. Nature is rather the theatre for evolution to operate in, and the principle of survival of the fittest can be practically translated as, if it works, do it. How moral or immoral an action is irrelevant to that calculus. Morality is only relevant to the operation of natural selection insofar as it is genetically beneficial. When it is no longer so, then for the sake of genetic survival it must be forsaken. In this vein, evolutionary theory can't tell you why you shouldn't lie to those you're not related to, break your promises to them, steal from or cheat them, if it's to your advantage to do so, and you can get away with doing it. That alone clearly shows the difference between morality and evolutionary altruism, I think. And there are many illuminating examples of how morality can be fast overridden when genetic advantage is at stake. Eugenicist policies are one, ethnic cleansing is another, and so is racial segregation. These examples also show very well why the difference between morality and the idea of evolved cooperation for the sake of one society is no trivial matter. If evolutionary moralists really thought through the implications of natural selection, they would see that it only leaves room for loving behavior when it's expedient for their family, or at best their racial group. This leaves us with tribalism, whose most logical extreme has been fascism. It's hard to see why true sacrifice or the absolute duty to do right can be justified on a purely naturalistic worldview then, since in a naturalistic universe all we're ultimately left with is the amorality of the operation of the selection for survival. So, for the pure naturalists, there's no good reason for universal morality, but strong, scientific, biological-based arguments against non-gene related sacrifice. Any arguments that you must be moral for the sake of genetic survival are from an absolute point of view an absolute non-starter, as there will be no genetic survival. Instead, in the long run, all species die, and in the very long run, all life in this universe will end. Nature doesn't care whether a gene line lives or dies, so why should you? You're a random, insignificant collection of cells on an insignificant speck of mud in a cold, dark, vast and empty universe. What about any of that tells you that it objectively matters what you do? Nothing. And if nothing objectively matters, it simply becomes a question of doing what's right in your own eyes, whether good or bad. The blindness or disingenuousness of those who claim that a naturalistic evolutionary worldview supports or grounds morality is staggering. I think it's only the moral sense inherited through a Judeo-Christian influenced culture that blinds evolutionary theorists to the full implication of the idea of the survival of the fittest, preventing them from seeing the morally nihilist implications of natural selection theory. The natural world is amoral, so how could we possibly use the natural world to justify morality? Social cooperation is not morality. You only have to look at Nazi Germany in the 1930s and 40s to see that. This means that morality must be true independent of evolutionary pressures and factors. The response you might hear to this from an evolutionary moralist is that morality is an extended application of tribal cooperation, even if this extension cannot be entirely explained in evolutionary terms. But that's exactly my point. You cannot explain morality itself entirely in evolutionary terms. If you say that morality is a mere accidental byproduct of tribal altruism, you still haven't explained it, or grounded morality in anything.